Time to talk about what to plant and why exactly. When I first started food plotting, this was probably the most overwhelming part of the whole thing, right? I mean, when you start thinking about all the different possibilities of the different forages you could plant, the different kinds, whether they're perennials or annuals, and different characteristics and the attractiveness to deer, it can just make your head spin. And so what I did through the years is kind of establish some criteria. And really, once you do this, you can narrow it down pretty easily to just a few forages that are going to work best for the small food plotter. Again, I'm talking about somebody who's planting 2 or 3 acres, which is the typical food plotter. So here's my criteria. First of all, as I mentioned in my introduction to this little series on food plotting the simple way, we all want, number one, to have forages that attract deer to our property in the fall to improve our hunting. So that's a given. Personally, I like to also have forages that feed deer as early in the spring, once the snow melts and the winter is gone, because I think that that's nutritionally really important to deer, especially to lactating does and to bucks when they're growing their antlers. So that's criteria number 2 for me, is I want spring food in my food plots. Then we also need forages that are going to be able to withstand browse pressure very well, because if you're only planting 2 or 3 acres, if you've got any kind of deer density at all, the deer are going to have it browsed down heavily. And if it's not the kind of forage that can recover from that and to keep growing and to keep feeding deer, you're going to find yourself without any food in your food plot halfway through hunting season, because you're not planting 10 or 15 or 20 acres of them. So, and then finally, because of the way we're doing this, we're top sowing. All we're really basically doing is we're going to kill all the existing weeds and grasses in a field, and we're going to top sow our seeds on, and we need something that's going to germinate very easily, that works very well, and that'll work for lots of different soil types, for those of us who are starting out with poorer soils maybe. So when you establish that criteria, you can narrow it down to just a couple of choices. Number one, and my favorite, and what I consider to be like my foundation for my food plots, is clover. Clover is a wonderful plant that has many attributes. As you can see, I'm standing in one of my clover fields right now. There's bees buzzing around in it. Deer love clover. It's easy to establish. I plant 3 different kinds of clover just for a little bit of variety. I mean, there's lots and lots of different kinds of clover. And so I narrow it down to 3 that are pretty common perennial clovers. I use ladino, I use alsike clover, and I use medium red clover in a mixture. And those have slightly different root depths, and they'll give you a little bit more insurance if you should have like abnormally dry or abnormally wet conditions. So that's my reason for using 3 different clovers. We had to move the recording studio here into the cabin. The horseflies were tormenting my camera woman too much. So wanted to finish up this segment about what I plant in my food plots and why. Already talked about clover. It's got lots of great attributes. The one downside to clover being the fact that it will go dormant after a few frosts in the fall. And but we've got a solution for that. And that is rye grain, sometimes called cereal rye, winter rye. It is a grain it's similar to wheat or oats. But the thing I love about rye is that it's the last thing to freeze down in the wintertime and the first thing to green up in the summer. So it gives you just more bang for your buck. It also has a lot of biomass. So in another video where I've talked about how we terminate rye and we use it as actually an armor for your soil, it does a really good job of that. In addition to its weed fighting capabilities, natural allelopathic chemical properties of rye. So it's just a great forage, and it's a go-to for me. And I use it, as I've already said, in conjunction with clover. That these 2 complement each other so well. Now, rye is an annual, so you'll plant it in the fall, and it will winter over and it'll come back in the spring, but it lives out its life cycle pretty much. It reaches a point in the spring where it's no longer palatable to deer, It gets stalky and it develops a seed head. They won't eat it anymore at that point. And again, that's when we terminate it, lay it down, and it becomes armor, and it has many other attributes that really benefit our overall system here. So really, clover and rye are the two foundation forages that I use. Now, I will often throw in I've experimented with another group of forages called brassicas. Brassicas kind of family that includes things like turnips, rape, kale, and radish is not technically a brassica. It's slightly different, but it's often lumped in with the brassicas. Now, I really like radish for a variety of reasons. It's good for, it has a really big root. It's good for your soil, and it germinates easy. Deer like it, so I will throw radish into my fall mix with my clover and with my rye. I don't always get great germination with the radish, but I do get it to come up through there and provide just a little bit more variety, a little bit different for something for the deer to eat, a little bit diversity for my soil. So I think it's worth doing. It doesn't cost a lot of money to throw in that radish. So that is the what I plant and the why I plant it. Now you may be thinking, well, what about soybeans? What about corn? And I already kind of covered that. Those are wonderful forages, and deer absolutely love them. There's no doubt about them, and they have a lot of great attributes, but they don't really work for the small food plotter. Those of us who are doing 2 or 3 acres and just topsoiling without farm equipment, without a no-till seed drill, those are just not going to work for us. They're just not practical choices, as good as they are. So really, I feel really strongly that a combination of clover and rye. Now, you can get creative here, and you can throw in wheat with your rye, and still really have a lot of the same positive aspects of rye you can get with wheat too. So sometimes I'll mix them 50-50. But generally speaking, my mixture of 3 kinds of different clover, rye grain, and some radish is all you need to attract deer, to feed deer in the spring, and to have a wonderful food plot program.